Okay, hi everybody. So most of you will know, if you are familiar with my work, that I don't make many overtly political videos, but I want to make a little bit of an exception here today, because what I want to do is to make what I suppose you could call is a kind of defence of centrism and moderate positions, which I think is particularly important, actually. Not just on the grounds that they're the right ones, but on the grounds that I would like to think, I think the hope was that the politics that would be reflected online would be reflective of the politics in the wider society, and I think the opposite is true. I propose to you that in the wider world, the wider Western world, that it's a kind of a normal distribution curve, with most people being politically moderate, and then as you get to the more extreme positions, less and less people. Where it's almost online, it's portrayed more of a kind of bimodal distribution, where the squeakiest wheel gets the grease, and more extreme positions actually tend to attract more traffic and more views and more interest, and it kind of skews the discussion. And in amongst that, I think there is a school of thought that thinks it's clever, thinks it's really big and clever to act ignorant and misportray centrism and moderation in politics. And that's what I want to tackle. Now, let me just say right from the word go, I have got my little cynical hat on here. You can't see it, but it's on. My little cynical hat is on here, because this does seem to be a positioning that tends to come from people who are rather more extreme. The kind of people who generally want to apply a single ideology to any set of circumstances, no matter how round their peg becomes and how square their hole becomes. They're just going to fucking mallet that peg in that hole by hook or by crook. And I can't help but feel that their issue is that they really, in some ways, don't want to be arguing with somebody who will say to them, that round peg of yours, there's some round holes over there, and it's great in those holes. Let's fit it in those holes. But the square hole, maybe what we need is a square peg to go in that square hole. Much better to have somebody who only has a series of square pegs and is malleting those square pegs in a series of round holes. And that brings us to the guy, the bomber guy, the Hbomberguy, who he's certainly not the first person to take this approach, but he took it only a few days ago now, on the 8th of March, with a series of tweets which he has now deleted. Why do people do that? Why do adults, this is an adult who has presumably thought through his political opinions, why is he deleting his tweets? Right, he's not 14, but he made a series of tweets which he has now deleted, making just these kinds of comments. So what I want to do is, first, let me read you through the 5 pertinent tweets that he made. I will make a few comments along the way, and then I want to say some more things after that. So some of the bigger issues I'll tackle afterwards, but just a few comments along the way. These were the tweets that he made. So this was his first tweet, and this was the tweet that got most of the pushback, but also most of the praise. Over 4,000 likes at the point where I took this screen grab, and I'm pleased I did, given that he deleted all his tweets. This is what he said. Moderation is a delusion people invent to describe themselves. There is no moderation between right and left, just like there is no moderation between correct and incorrect. Then he says this garbled sentence, which I'm not going to comment on because it doesn't even make any sense. That's just wrong but pretentious and easily upset about it. I don't even know what that means. Most people took offence, or took issue, I should say, with the idea that there's no moderation between correct and incorrect, but we'll come back to that. We'll come back to that because effectively of the remaining 4 tweets, he reiterates that point twice more. I want to just talk about the 2 things he says before that. The first one, moderation is a delusion people invent to describe themselves. Well, in a way, yes, it is, because moderate is a word, and words do not have concrete definitions. They are abstract concepts that we invent to describe the world about us. That is why we have words. And moderate is just such a word. It doesn't have a concrete definition. In a way, it is a kind of delusion. But it's a delusion that we have invented because we wish to be able to describe people's political positioning. It is no different in that regard to the terms right and left. They are just as much a delusion that we have invented to allow us to describe the political spectrum, certain ideologies and areas, fields of belief, and the kinds of people that typically hold those positions. So that doesn't really make any sense. The next part, there is no moderation between right and left. What gets me about that is that it kind of portrays right and left as if they are points in political space. Nothing could be further from the truth. They are huge fields of political belief that extend in all directions, and the vast majority of people who are on the right and the vast majority of people on the left hold moderated positions. Very, very few people hold the most extreme position on either of those wings. Jeremy Corbyn is probably the most left-wing leader the Labour Party has had for some time now, but he's certainly not as far left as he could be. I am quite certain that he doesn't believe that the state should be running absolutely everything, or that workers' collective should be running absolutely everything, and that the free market has absolutely nothing to offer whatsoever. So his position is a moderated position. So if you can have moderation between the right and moderation between the left, why couldn't you have moderation between the right and left? That makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. Okay, his second tweet reiterates the key point that he made in the first tweet that I'll be coming back to. The moderation between drinking poison and not drinking poison is drink a little bit of poison, then a bit more when the purity testing non-drinkers make fun of you. As I say, I'll come back to that. The third one I'm actually going to deal with now. I understand there's social capital right now in seeming open-minded and capable of compromise. That's how he opens this week. Tell me, maybe I'm misinterpreting that, but it sounds as if he's kind of sneering about that. He doesn't like it. It's the same as somebody would say, I understand there's social capital right now in being offended. When people say that kind of thing, it suggests that they don't really like that scenario, that they're criticising that scenario. Why would you criticise there being social capital in being open-minded and capable of compromise? Certainly that is not true of all societies. There have been societies where it's been looked down upon to be open-minded and capable of compromise. They are not societies that I would want to live in, I can certainly tell you now. Aren't they worthy attributes, being open-minded and capable of compromise? I don't know. I really mind-boggled with that. And then he says, in an increasingly partisan time. So he is aware that political positions are getting more extreme, and by the fact that he said it, I presume he doesn't regard that as a universally good thing, and yet here he is effectively decrying people for not being sufficiently partisan, for not having sufficiently extreme views. He goes on, but it's not open-minded at all to fetishise your existing beliefs as the things open-minded people believe. Okay, the fourth tweet, not so interested in this, but I'll read it out for the sake of completeness. Forgive the rant, just a little tired seeing people waste so much of the time they could have spent having a real discussion, telling people how clever and non-extreme they think what they believe is. I care about what you actually think, not how normal what you think is. That is kind of assuming, is it not, that centrists or moderates don't really believe what they're saying, they're just saying it anyway. And then the fifth one goes back to the poison and the no moderation between correct and incorrect theme. He says this: sure, you can be partially right about things, but the goal is to be more right and not to get a healthy balance, isn't it? So what have I got to say with regard to all of this? I think the first thing that I want to say is that often centrist positions are portrayed as if that is an ideology in itself. The ideology of kind of fetishizing the middle ground, and that you just have to look at what the two extremes are and then pick the absolute centre position, which is rather bizarre. It's certainly not my experience of people who are centre left through to centre right. What I see in the real world is people who, of course, they hold ideologies and make views and take positions based on those ideologies, but they see the conflict between different ideological positions, and they see the worth in different ideological positions. And as a result of that, they judge lots of different issues based upon their merits, and from an ideological perspective end up arriving at a set of solutions or political positions that in some ways would not appear exactly entirely consistent from a political basis. They're not always entirely siding on the left or entirely siding on the right, and that they're trying to manage these different ideological positions, that they see a world that is messy, where not everything can be satisfied that you would like to satisfy at the same time, and that effectively they use terms like moderate or centrist. They're not using them as the driving motive force of their political beliefs, but rather they are a descriptor that comes after the fact. After that they've arrived, they've reached kind of political maturity as an adult in their late teens, early 20s, or some kind of maturity. And what they've done is they have adopted those labels, because when they view their basket of political positions in the framework of the society they live in, they say, hey, I'm kind of in the middle ground here. I can see these people over here. I can see these people over there. And I can see some value in what they're saying, but really I don't align with either of them. That's entirely different to the way that it's being portrayed here. And somebody made a graphic and linked the graphic, and I think that that graphic entirely demonstrated the way that this is being misportrayed. This was the graphic, and it gave the example of gun control. And I think the example of gun control that's used here is a really elegant example, actually, better than it was when I first saw this graphic. When I first saw it, I thought, I wish they hadn't chosen gun control, because a lot of us aren't in the centre here. But this is beautiful, because this describes what centrism is about, because centrism isn't actually always about, and moderation isn't actually always about being in the centre. It's about striking a balance, and that balance isn't always between the ideological hardline positions on either side, but between the ideological position that you hold and the practical realities of the society that you live in. So for me, my ideological bent with regard to gun control would be to have the least amount of guns in society that you could have. Right, but I have to weigh that against the practical realities of the society that I am in. The practical reality of the society in the UK is that we have pretty non-porous borders. We have the sea and the ocean that surrounds our island, and so we have fairly non-porous borders with regard to guns, and not many guns in circulation in the United Kingdom. Contrast that with the United States, which has much more porous borders with regard to firearms and is awash with guns relative to the United Kingdom. So the position that I would take for the United States would be a little bit more to the right, because practically it doesn't seem feasible to adopt quite the same hardline position that we have in the United Kingdom. In the United States, I'd have to moderate my position a little bit more, and I propose to you that's what a political moderation, political centrism is all about. Contrast that with the example given there. What moral absolutists think centrism is: feed all babies into a wood chipper, feed no babies into a wood chipper, and the centrist position would be feed 50% of babies into a wood chipper. Now that might sound like, you might be saying, Jim, you're criticising Hbomberguy for strawmanning and then you're strawmanning. Let me read you his example again. The moderation between drinking poison and not drinking poison is drink a little bit of poison, and that is the way he is describing moderates and centrists. That is absolutely the same as that example with the wood chipper. What I like to do is this: rather than just discard that ridiculous analogy which he effectively made 3 times in those 5 tweets, is to try and repurpose it and show you how you could alter that analogy to make it a more worthwhile analogy and overcome its shortfall. So, okay, we'll take the position of a poison, shall we, and how you may adopt a moderate position with a poison. Now, I'm proposing that probably Hbomberguy adopts a moderate position with a poison. So let's pick a poison. Ethanol, the alcohol of choice for most drinkers, because it's the least poisonous of them. But it's still a poison. If you drink too much ethanol, too much alcohol, too much beer, too much vodka, too much scotch, you will die. It is toxic to the human body, is it not? But if you don't drink any, you won't have any of the wonderful social effects of mild, moderate or heavy inebriation that most of us enjoy. Maybe not the next day, but we enjoy at the time. So what do? We adopt a moderate position. We don't drink so much ethanol that it kills us, that it becomes toxic and that we fall unconscious and die, but we do drink some on occasion, because we can see a balance between the potential benefits of drinking it and the potential dangers of drinking it. That is a valid analogy, ladies and gentlemen, of how centrism or moderate positions actually function. The example that he gave was not. And it's a really disingenuous thing. He says at the end there, sure, you can be like partially right about things, but the goal is to be more right and not to get a healthy balance, isn't it? That gets to the core of the misrepresentation that he's making. The issues that people are moderate about, that they moderate, are issues that are genuine dilemmas, genuine political dilemmas, societal dilemmas, cultural dilemmas, moral dilemmas, and they are trying to balance those things out. It's not a situation such as he describes where one side is entirely right, the other side is entirely wrong, it's entirely black and white, and every observer is sure of that. In fact, the centrist is sure of that. The centrist is sure if he plumps for A, he'll be 100% correct. If he plumps for B, he's wrong, but for some reason he goes for A stroke B because, oh, the last thing I want to be is totally right. Who in their right mind does that? That is absolute horseshit. I would ask Hbomberguy about abortion and the abortion limit, right? There are two extreme positions. One, no elective abortions at all. Two, you can have an elective abortion right up until the moment that baby is about to pop out of its mother, right? 10 centimeters dilated. I'm sorry, I want an abortion at this point. Kill the soon to be born baby. I want an abortion, right? The moderate position is to find something in between. It's often about 20 weeks, something like that. Now, I propose that we're not doing that because we only want to be part right. We know really that either 0 weeks or all the way up until the baby's about to pop out is the real correct position. But we don't really want to be correct. We just want to be part correct. I propose to you that it might actually have something to do with trying to balance the rights of the mother with the rights of the baby and looking at the brain development and the central nervous development system of the baby and of the ability of the baby to exist outside of the womb, trying to balance and juggle all these balls and arrive at a moderate position. And it's not about trying to be half right. When we set an age of consent of 15, 16, 18, it's not because we secretly believe that however old you are, you shouldn't have sex, or that it's okay to fuck babies, right? We secretly believe that one of those is right, but we just don't want to be right. We only want to be part right. It's actually because we're trying to balance the different concerns, and that is why we've arrived at a moderate position, right? I mean, what is his position with regard to things like moderate Muslims? Does Hbomberguy go, fucking sellouts, give me the hardline extremists anytime? Or does he appreciate the fact that some Muslims try and balance their religious beliefs and what they read in the texts with what they actually see in the real world, and to try and function as a member of society that fits in with everybody else? I am sure when it comes to Muslims that he sees the benefit of being moderate and sees how you have to balance these different things. That it's not just that one is correct and one is incorrect, but that it's a balancing act that the individual has to perform. I am sure when it comes to sexuality, he doesn't look at people who are bisexual and go, fucking sellouts, you're straight or you're gay. He accepts that these things exist on a spectrum, and there's nothing wrong with being in the middle of that spectrum. It's not that you're trying to appease everybody, that's just where you happen to be. When it comes to gender identity, he doesn't go with the people who are non-gender binary, fucking sellouts, you're a man or a woman. He accepts that, again, gender identity exists on a spectrum, and being in that middle of the spectrum isn't trying to appease everybody. In fact, often it's quite the opposite. Being in the middle of the spectrum appeases nobody. But if that is where you find yourself, why the fuck wouldn't you describe yourself as that? And why should you be mocked or shamed for describing yourself as that if that is where you happen to actually lie? It doesn't make any sense. It takes a moron with 5 minutes on his hands to make the kinds of examples that Hbomberguy makes here, where you take an example where there is no debate whatsoever. Stick your head in boiling hot chip fat, or don't stick your head in boiling hot chip fat. The centrist is the person who sticks his head in boiling hot chip fat up to the bridge of his nose. Anybody can make those kind of moronic examples, right? Because the reason they're so trivial to make is because there is no dilemma. There are no arguments on either side. But the real things, the arguments that we have in real societies that keep cropping up, as a general rule, keep cropping up because there are arguments on either side. Sometimes those arguments appeal to the same ideology, right? You want to maintain, you want to reflect the rights of religious people to live their religion, but also reflect the rights of gay people to be gay, and they come into conflict even with the same ideology. More often there are conflicting ideologies, but nevertheless there is some worth, some merit, something that you can see behind both ideologies. Maybe like me, you would like to live in a society that is a genuine meritocracy. In a perfect meritocracy, everybody would have exactly the same start in life. But then contrast that with the fact that some people have more resources quite legitimately. They've worked harder, they've done more, they have more resources, and they are prepared perhaps to give those resources, or give a greater proportion of the resources that they have towards their child's education. You can't satisfy the former without penalising those parents to level the playing field. Why ethically should you penalise parents for investing more in their child's education? That seems morally objectionable to do that as well. So these things are existing within a tension of one another. These are complex social situations, and they are not summed up by the idea of drinking fucking poison or not drinking poison, or being correct or being totally incorrect and choosing, well, I'm going to be half correct, I think. What I don't understand, and I've kind of focused on Hbomberguy because he released this perfect series of tweets to talk about this, but what is the goal? Hbomberguy typifies the kind of person who'll whine and piss and moan and fucking gripe about people who have very, very different hardline political views from himself. So presumably he doesn't want people to hold those more extreme views. And yet when he sees people who have more moderate views that are nevertheless not the same as his views, he mocks them and scolds them for having more moderate views. The mind boggles what he actually wants to achieve. He doesn't like extremism and he doesn't like moderation. So other than people being exactly in lockstep with his beliefs, which is never going to happen, right? Because, hey, diversity we should be valuing, including diversity of thought, and it's just simply not feasible that everybody's going to be agreeing with us 100% of the time. Why would you hold a position that holds somebody with more extreme views in a greater regard than somebody who has views that are closer to your own? That seems ultimately a pretty destructive approach to take. Okay. That is what I think. Was that sufficiently immoderate of me, that video? Did I set out what I wanted to say sufficiently, right? Sufficiently crystal clear for the likes of Hbomberguy? I hope I have. I hope my flag is now firmly nailed to the fucking mast on that one so that they can't complain, at least on this issue. At least on this issue. Okay, that's what I wanted to say. Thank you for watching. Bye for now.